afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you may be. My name is Lindawi Davis, and welcome to another Google Talks. I, of course, work at Google. My current role is as an organizational effectiveness DEI PGM lead, and I do that in the GCP AMP area of Google, which is an engineering org. And of course, I focus quite a bit of my work and time in the DEI space, but also better understanding how to build out programs and initiatives and doing that strategically so that we can move closer to our goals, both as an org and at Google as a whole. Today, I'm super excited because we're going to be talking to a wonderful business leader by the name of Reggie Fils-Aimé, who is an award-winning innovator who has helped bring the Nintendo DS, the Wii, and Nintendo 3DS, Wii U, and Nintendo Switch to the global marketplace. He had joined Nintendo America in December 2003 as an executive vice president of sales and marketing. In May 2006, he was promoted to president and chief operating officer. He was inducted into the International Video Game Hall of Fame in October 2019. Shout out to all of you gamers out there. I am just now learning my way around some of these consoles, even though my brothers played. But as far as Reggie is concerned, he received the annual Legend Award from the New York Videogame Critics Circle in January 2020. Before joining Nintendo, he was the SVP of marketing at VH1. During his time at VH1, he engineered the channel's redirection to young viewers that resulted in overall 30% ratings growth. I say all this to say that this particular gentleman has over 35 years of career experience in operating as an executive, spanning the consumer packaged goods, restaurant, beverage, and media entertainment industries. Since retiring, he has focused his energy on developing the next generation of business leaders. In August 2019, he was named the inaugural Cornell University's Dyson Leader in Residence. He also founded Brentwood Growth Partners to help emerging companies scale and enable leaders to create world-class cultures. And with all of those beautiful accomplishments, let's welcome Reggie Fils-Aimé.
Hi there, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well.
Good. I kept thinking I need to take a sip of water with all of those accomplishments.
You highlighted all of that exceptionally well. It made me blush backstage.
I'm glad. Never my intention, but I'm glad. So we've got some great time today to kind of walk through, not necessarily walk through everything in this beautiful book that you have written, right? And we'll jump into that in just a second. But I wanted to talk a little bit about you, your introduction. Let's first start by having you introduce yourself, sharing one thing that a lot of people don't know. That's one. And two, talk to us about where you are residing right now.
Sure. I'll do the second part first. I currently reside outside of the Seattle, Washington area, along the water of Lake Washington. One thing that many people don't know is that I am an avid scuba diver. I don't scuba dive out here in this cold water. I prefer warmer water, especially as I've gotten older. But I love the water. I get rejuvenated from water, being near water, under the water. So those just a couple little tidbits about me.
That's excellent. And the scuba diving aspect, it's on my list, much like surfing or skiing, but I have not gotten to it. So I'm so glad that you brought that up because we never really hear that from other brown people saying, yes, I go scuba diving. So shout out to you on that. With this particular Google Talks, of course, we're anchored in the discussion around this amazing book that's coming out called Disrupting the Game, From the Bronx to the Top of Nintendo. And so I kind of want to jump into a little bit of your background, right? Because you are originally from the Bronx and you've spent your formative years there, but then you shifted to Long Island, right? And so I guess my first question here is much more rooted in what kinds of cultural differences did you glean from both of those environments? And then how did those elements really shape how you've moved in your life, both as an early executive and now as a more seasoned leader?
So I spent the first 8 years of my life in the Bronx.
Mhm.
And, even today, the Bronx back then was a very rough place.
Absolutely.
Today, the Bronx encompasses one of the poorest congressional districts in the United States, which, is always shocking when I state that fact.
Yeah.
It has a significant amount of food insecurity. For me, my parents emigrated to the U.S. from Haiti,
Mhm.
and in Haiti, they were college educated. They were part of really the upper class in that country, but
Mhm.
moved to the United States not speaking English. Took menial jobs, and we were living in this 5-floor walk-up uh, apartment tenement
Mhm.
building, infested with vermin and roaches. That was the first 8 years of my life. And as a kid, you know, it's just what is around you. But in seeing my parents, especially my father, working two jobs in order to save enough money for us to buy a small house out on Long Island,
Yeah.
you see things that teach you the power of grit, that teach you how to really apply yourself to overcome challenges.
Mhm.
I was fortunate to be gifted academically, and watching my parents work so hard to help put their family forward, it grounded me in the principle of working hard and really doing everything you can to take control of your life and to try and push yourself forward.
No, I mean, just reading that, reading all about that in the beginning of the book, those first few chapters around that hard work ethic and really kind of absorbing that from your parents is such a big element and attribute to have around you on a constant basis, especially considering the circumstances of which you just listed out, within that 5-4 walk up. What about grit? Just leaning into that a little bit more. Do you think that that's something that people acquire? Is it already in you? Is it something that you have to acquire? This is a conversation I've had with friends a lot of times. Is it the nurture versus nature thing where you already have it in you, or is it something that comes out of a set of experiences?
I, I think it's a bit of both. I do believe what is innate is a sense of initiative,
Mm.
a sense of moving forward. And I say this because as a hiring executive and as a people manager, it is difficult to teach someone to have that initiative and that sense of purpose. I have found it to be very difficult to teach that. So I do believe much of that comes from within.
Yeah.
I also believe, though, that there is a sense of resilience. There's a sense of uh, moving forward mentally and being prepared to overcome obstacles, that I do think that is something that you can train and can develop. I am certain, as an example, that much of my own personal grit and resilience came from my parents. I am certain of it. Um, and my mental outlook to look for positive things, to look forward versus looking backwards. These are all behaviors that I picked up from my parents, and I do believe, these are behaviors that you can develop and encourage in others.
Plus one to that. I too believe that there's something about being around someone when you're a child who has a very, very strong sense of self, but who is also centered, who may not have all of the attributes or resources that you see other people with, but they somehow make it work in the current environment. And you being the child, you absorb all of that. Much of my grit and determination came from my mother, right? And so I totally understand that aspect, being able to turn one situation, one adverse situation, into something that's much more positive for you later down the road. Speaking of adversity, something that I was thinking about the other day when I was reading your book was I'm an avid Calm app user. And so LeBron James has a beautiful volume on there where he's talking about adversity and remembering that adversity is not negative. And so digging into corporate America is a very different experience for people of color and more specifically Black professionals. And so when I'm thinking about all of these amazing companies that you've worked for example, you were at P&G at a young age, Panda, Viacom, Nintendo, etc. Your book shares experiences of how you strategically moved from each one of these companies and roles, really trying to grow yourself. But I want to better understand, in any of those circumstances, in any of those roles or cases, when you were faced with whether it was racism or microaggressive behavior or just adversity as a whole, how did you set yourself up to thrive versus just survive those spaces?
I believe that at different stages of your career, you manage these situations differently. And let me just give a couple examples. So when I was at Procter & Gamble, as you mentioned, I was there quite early in my professional journey. I was hired into P&G right out of undergrad from Cornell University and hired to do a job that typically would be done by those with MBAs. And so literally, I was doing the same job as people who were minimally 5 years, could be as much as 8 or 9 years older than me. Same job. I was being paid substantially less. And I was a first-time people manager at the age of about 25, 26 years old. And in this role, I was managing a business that had a huge part of its volume from areas in northern Florida and the Carolinas, parts of Tennessee. And a sales manager working on this business, who historically grew up in that geographic area, he and I had a first-time business meeting. And it was clear that he had not been around people of color in a managerial type of situation. And this was a setting where drinks were being served, and it was clear that he had probably had one too many. And he made a statement to me along the lines of, Reggie, you may think you're the manager of this business, but you're not.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to listen to you. I'm not going to support your initiatives. And, at 25, 26 years old, in front of probably 50 people, the choice is to do nothing or to do something.
Right.
And I chose to do something. And, my statement to this person was essentially, I am the manager. I am running this business. And if you're unable to deal with this, then I will have you moved off of this business.
Okay.
And it doesn't matter that I didn't have the authority to do this. He was in a different function. He's in sales. I'm in the marketing and business management role. But my mental attitude was I had to address the issue. There was no way for me not to address the issue. And upon the next day, he apologized. His boss apologized. I returned back to my home office. People had already heard the story. People came up to me and complimented me in the way I handled it. I was professional.
Right.
I was direct. in dealing with the issue. And as I talk to young people as they're dealing with their own personal situations, I often counsel them that, look, you need to be professional. You need to manage the situation clearly and appropriately in these types of settings.
Right.
The other example I would share with you is, whether I was in Japan working with Nintendo or in industry settings in the video game industry, there were not many black or brown faces near me in my role doing the types of things that I do.
Mm-hmm.
And in that situation, I found I needed to handle the situation a little bit differently. I needed to be more cognizant of my senior leadership role, the fact that my behavior will be emulated by others. And
Mm-hmm.
so I have to be more thoughtful. I have to be a bit more centered, maybe a little less aggressive in
Mm-hmm.
managing the situation. But clearly, it is also still being direct and being professional and managing these situations to a positive conclusion.
Absolutely. I like what you said about managing the situation, but then also being mindful about how you're approaching the situation. And it's just because every person is not terribly aware all of the time of their behavior. Right. And in the work that I do as well, it's terribly apparent that sometimes I have to take the activist hat and put it in just a little bit. I can't put it out all the way. It might be too fiery for some people. Right. And so, with that being said, I want to dig a little bit more into approach. Right. So, throughout your career, you've had a myriad of positions in which you also had a platform, very, very strong platform to speak to how you wanted the business to shift, how you wanted to innovate. What about speaking to innovation is important in any company setting, but then also speaking boldly about how to shift a company from a varied practice to a traditional practice to a non-traditional practice? How have you kind of navigated those spaces, particularly because, again, you worked in the gaming space, the entertainment space, and those spaces are consistently moving?
Absolutely. And I- I'm I gravitate toward industries and settings where the pace is fast, where you need to be making clear decisions based on data and insight, but at times relying on your gut in
Hmm.
order to move a situation forward. So my personality, my mentality enables me to gravitate toward those situations. I'm
Absolutely.
fortunate that in those situations, I typically have made good decisions and have moved businesses forward. But I'm also aware that there are times that you need to pivot and move off of a decision before the results get worse and the lasting impact of that decision becomes too devastating. In my book, I highlight that when I was working in the restaurant industry,
Hmm.
I was working for Pizza Hut for a period of time. And I was tasked with an initiative in the early 90s to go after one of our key competitors
Hmm.
and to launch a product that was really targeted to take share from that competitor. Just a little bit of background, early 90s, a recessionary time, much like we're entering now. That competitor that we were targeting was the brand Little Caesars.
Hmm.
Their core concept, lots of pizza for a low price. Doesn't matter that the pizza doesn't taste all that great, but it was a value position that they were offering. Pizza Hut is broadly positioned on a quality spectrum. They are much more focused on great quality pizza offered through delivery as well as dine-in or carryout. And so I was tasked with creating a product line that would go after Little Caesars, which we did. It was a product called Bigfoot Pizza.
Right.
This product quickly scaled to be $1 billion business. It was massively successful because our product was just a little bit better than Little Caesars. We offered delivery, we priced it right. But here's the insight.
Mm-hmm.
The insight is that as this product was in the marketplace, it began to negatively affect the brand perception of Pizza Hut.
Mm-hmm.
And so you need to imagine this. Here I am, an executive who had championed this product, who had launched it. We had won awards for this product and created $1 billion business. But based on the data and insight I was seeing, I now needed to recommend to shut this business down.
Mm-hmm.
That we couldn't allow it to continue because long-term it was going to have a negative impact on the brand perception of Pizza Hut.
Mm-hmm.
So, this experience gave me a tremendous amount of learning around, yes, how to be fast-paced, how to be decisive, how to utilize data and insight to make key decisions, the key decision to launch this product, as well as the key decision to shut it down. And I've been fortunate to have many of these types of experiences that I've been able to bring to bear, especially during my 15 plus years at Nintendo.
Mm-hmm. There's so many nuggets there, particularly the phrasing around pivoting, what it means to pivot, right? Because you talk a little bit about that in the book, where there's some beautiful anecdotes around when you understand that you've put your best foot forward in trying to market the business, but then also create additional space for that market share with your competitors. And then it still does not work out. You do have to pivot. And much like in life, it's that same kind of thing, right? Where if something is not quite working out, you have to shift. I want to dig a little bit more into this notion of culture fit, thinking about culture add, because a lot of your book dives deeply into what it means to take a person, really review the person, aka the candidate, and think thoroughly through what they're bringing to the table versus them just fitting into the company. And I think that while you were writing the book, and this you tell me, but when I was reading the book, I was thinking about what it must have been like for you when you started 20 years ago, trying to get in the door, right? So many people trying to get into the door, hoping that they pick you, hoping that you are going to be the one that's chosen. And then 20 something years later, 30 years later, there's opportunity to be and hone in on what someone is adding to the culture versus them trying to fit in. And so I wonder for you, how do you see being someone who's adding value to the culture as a powerful tool to get yourself in the door, using your lived experiences, but also just being more open-minded as a candidate?
So a couple things. First, I believe as a senior executive, your job is to shape the culture. Your job is to be very intentional in thinking about of the culture are positive and need to be reinforced. And you need to think about what elements of the culture are no longer working and they need to be
Mm-hmm.
changed. They need to be shifted. They may need to be eliminated. And this has to be very intentional work. Um,
Mm-hmm.
in that view, culture is always changing. And the senior most leadership needs to make sure that it is changing in a positive direction. You do that based on the people you hire.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, you do that based on the people who move off a business. You do that based on the behaviors that you reinforce, and doing all of this type of work very clearly, so that the organization can see how you're shaping it and how you're moving it forward. I passionately believe that this has to be done very intentionally.
Mm-hmm.
As a mid-level executive, I believe that you constantly have to be thinking about your team, the skills, the capabilities, working with your teams to enhance those key positive skills, to make
Mm-hmm.
sure that they're well positioned for the future, to make sure that the business is moving forward, as well as to be addressing the potential performance issues and making sure that they're addressed early enough so that the individual can make their own personal shift to be successful moving forward. As a brand new candidate trying to enter a particular company, I strongly advocate that you do your research to understand the culture that you're joining, to ask questions during the interview process about the culture. And in the book, I highlight that, during a recruiting process, there's a shift that happens from early on when you're selling yourself to later in the process. Now the organization is selling themselves to you.
True.
And that's the time to be asking the penetrating questions to really make sure that, should you choose to join that organization, that you're joining a culture that fits, how you think about business, how you approach problems, how you work to get things done. In my experience, typically when you hire someone, it's not that they didn't have the requisite skills to be successful. Typically when it doesn't work out, it's because the culture fit wasn't there.
Thinking a little bit more about pushback. In the book, you highlight some instances where you took an opportunity to push back on what the common theme or common thought process was going to be. And so, I'd love for you to share an example of how you thoughtfully pushed back on a notion, whether it was, and the thing that's coming to my mind was the story around the marketing for Wii. And I wonder, do you have a way of approaching pushback when you are the person that's sitting at a certain level, but then you are talking to the top senior executive? Because this is something that a lot of people still struggle with, per their personalities or just per the fact that they don't ever feel comfortable being the person that's kind of the outlier. So do you have some ways in which you think that you can push back when you know that something could be done, but no one else in the room can hear you?
Sure. And for me, my mental approach is that, whenever I am pushing forward an idea, I'm trying to sell the other person on understanding my point of view and joining me in my point of view. I really see it as a communication process and a salesmanship process. And therefore, when you're selling an idea, pushing a point of view, and you're beginning to get resistance, my approach is first, you need to hear that person's perspective and really understand where it is that they're coming from. Are they objecting or challenging a particular part of your initiative? Are they challenging the entire initiative? You need to understand the other person's point of view. Once you've understood that point of view, you then need to make sure you consider it. And what's the difference, right? The difference is the first phase is penetrating to understand what their issue might be. And then the second phase is you need to think about and ask yourself, are they right? Do they have a nugget of information that I really need to reconsider before trying to push forward on this idea? Now, if you're at the point where you've heard the other person out, their perspective, while you understand it, you disagree with it, then you need to provide more information and differentiated information in order to move the idea forward. So let's make this practical and get into one of the examples that I highlight in the book, and that is getting the global president of Nintendo comfortable with the advertising that we were going to use to launch the Wii console here in the Americas. And if there are any gamers watching this who may remember that advertising, but it utilized two Japanese businessmen who are traveling throughout the Americas, Canada, the US, Latin America, introducing players to the Wii utilize and showcasing the Wii remote, which was, if you will, the key innovation that we were bringing to bear with this particular console. And the advertising would always open up with this iconic phrase from one of the Japanese businessmen saying, "We would like to play," and presenting people with the Wii remote. Well, the objection that was coming from the Kyoto-based headquarters in Japan was that, these Japanese businessmen were way too casual. They were way too informal. The way they were interacting with our families in the advertising, that it just wasn't the way things would be done in Japan. And, I listened to this and then communicated that, while I clearly understand the issue that's being raised, the fact of the matter is the advertising isn't going to run in Japan. The fact of the matter is that in all of the work we had done testing this advertising, that this type of interaction really was the secret sauce of the advertising, and that it was tremendously compelling. And I communicated all this to the global president. He continued to push back.
Right.
But then I played the card that, you can only play this card a handful of times. I played the card that, look, you hired me because of my background in innovation, my background in marketing. You know what my track record is. At the time that the global president and I were having this conversation, I had just been promoted to be president of Nintendo of America. And I told him, you need to trust me. That while you may not see all of the insights that I have, at this point, you need to trust me. And the advertising worked. The region that I was responsible for had the best performance of all of the regions behind the launch and ongoing sales of the Wii platform. But the really striking part in this story wasn't that I sold a point of view. The striking part of the story was that a number of years after he and I had had this conversation and the results were playing out in the marketplace, in front of a forum of employees, he used this example to highlight how he was wrong in his initial perspective. And only by having trust in me, confidence in what I was doing, that was the only reason that we got the advertising on air and had those great results. And so he was using it as a teachable moment with others around how you need to have trust in your leaders, how you need to have confidence in their capability, and in this case, that confidence and belief in what I was trying to do paid off.
So many amazing things about that story that kind of resonate with me is that, number one, you recognize that there was a need to not let this go. And I think a lot of times when you're working on products, right, Google is a place of products, events, initiatives, sponsorship, social impact work outside of Google, et cetera, et cetera. But as the folks that are inside of Google doing the work, a lot of times we're just running, right? And we may not want to rock the boat. And so several elements of that story really resonate in that sense of really trusting yourself, but then also speaking up when you know in your heart, right? Not just in your ego, because that's like a secondary thing, but in your heart that something could be very beautiful as a result of driving forward with this plan that was put into place. Shifting gears just a little bit to talk about gaming, okay? So when I'm thinking about gaming, I remember 30 years ago, 25 years ago, my brothers, my household, not a lot of money, but we had saved up, got the Sega Genesis. We got that first Nintendo that came out. We've got Duck Hunt, et cetera, et cetera. And so, and here I am, a little kid trying to shoot at the screen and hope, okay, if I move my hand, the duck will go down as well. But we all know gaming doesn't work like that. So I just revealed that I'm the kind of person that moves with the controller. So talking a little bit about gaming and how this is something that you feel so close to and you feel so passionate about. Is this something that, well, let me reframe. With passion, is there a difference for you between doing this kind of work, leaning into something that you happen to be passionate about, and how do you plug that into what you believe your purpose is in life?
So I am fortunate that throughout my entire career, I have either had a passion for the product that I was working on, or I developed a passion for the product I was working on. And this is true from the days that I was working in the food and beverage industry and making pies and cookies and working on test market products and innovating in that area, to my time in the music and entertainment industry with VH1. I have a huge passion for music. And, it's absolutely true that I have a passion for gaming. And that passion started before I was ever an employee at Nintendo. My first system was the Super Nintendo Entertainment System in the early 90s. I played that system, the Nintendo 64, the Sony PlayStation 2, the original Xbox. I played on all of those systems. And, I do have a passion for gaming. Gaming today is the largest form of entertainment. It's larger than all of the various, entertainment experiences that you have the opportunity to do today. And you're absolutely right that, industries that you might have a passion for, it's quite different than, how you think about your own internal mission and what it is that you personally are trying to do.
Right.
And so for me right now, as a retired executive from Nintendo, but someone who still is involved in the video game industry, my purpose is something different. My purpose is to empower, encourage the next generation of business leaders. That's why I wrote the book. That's why I do public speaking. That's why I invest my time back in that neighborhood that I grew up in the Bronx, to mentor young people and to encourage them to follow their own passions. That is my focus. That is my passion. That is my mission in life today, is to help that next generation of leader, because we've got some tough problems. We've got some tough challenges to overcome.
Absolutely.
And we need young people who are, focused and enabled to take on those big challenges.
Yeah, I love this particular gem around the fact that you took something that you enjoyed and it ended up becoming a part of your entire career pathway, and something that you ended up leaning more into because you had a passion for it before you even got into the work. I think it's always such an important factor, whether it's gaming, whether it's entertainment, whether it's fashion, whatever that thing is, that it's okay to lean into these things. But you remember, Reggie, I may be dating myself as well, but many, many years ago, decades ago, you would have never heard anyone say, oh, yes, let's go play video games and, build out some marketing programs and figure out how we were going to operationalize, et cetera, et cetera. But now there's such an amazing community around the gaming industry, just on the simple precipice that it's no longer taboo. And it's also much more integrated. More and more people are integrated across the country, let alone the world, right? And it's bringing people together. Are there specific consoles right now? This may set the comments ablaze, but Is there one particular console that's like your favorite console, or just one that you're using right now?
Yeah, so I'm going to answer the question in a slightly different way because I I play all the consoles. I always have, even as an executive at Nintendo.
Hmm.
I spent time on all of the platforms and the competitive consoles. And I believe as an executive, you need to look to understand your competitors. You need to experience what
Hmm.
they're offering. And I did that as an executive, and I continue to do it today. The way I'll answer your question is, I think there are a number of companies that are doing really interesting things today in this gaming space. And I'll highlight two. Um, One is the company Epic.
Hmm.
And I focus on Epic because, on one hand, they offer development tools to developers in order to create content. They started with a focus on gaming, but their engine for
Hmm.
development is being used in movie production. It's being moved across a much wider range of entertainment, which I think is really interesting. Because
Hmm.
what it says is that these types of tool sets are going to be used to drive improvements and innovation broadly across the entire entertainment space. I think
Hmm.
that's a very positive and interesting development. The other part of Epic is they themselves make games. Probably their best known game is Fortnite. And why that game is interesting is that in this game, there have been real world concerts and real world events, and it's the earliest examples of this concept called the metaverse, right? This
Hmm.
concept of a digital experience that blends real world and digital world. It leverages your avatars, and there's going to be continued investment and continued work in this space, and
Hmm.
they're doing some very interesting activity there. The other company I would highlight is Roblox.
Mm.
What makes Roblox interesting is that, at least today, the company doesn't make their own games.
Right.
All they've done is created a platform for other creators to make content, which is very interesting. They monetize off of these these other creators, and yet again, it's a very broad-based platform. You've got content for younger players, for older players. It's a range of different types of games. And again, what I find interesting is not only the platform they've created, but everything revolves around one common currency in this space.
Hmm.
Which, as that continues to develop, I think that could be another interesting aspect of this concept of the metaverse. So those would be two companies I would highlight.
Yep.
Each of them is a platform onto themselves, but each of them doing very interesting things.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for that breakdown because, again, there's so many people who are just now getting into gaming, who may be avid gamers, or who are people who have been a part of the culture for such a long time. Where do you see the gaming culture going
Well,
at this point?
as you said, gaming today touches, it's coming up on 4 billion people in some way, shape, or form say that they play games.
Yeah.
4 billion people. Whether you're playing on a dedicated console, whether you're playing on a tablet, on a mobile phone, people are experiencing this digital content.
Right.
And it is something that brings people together. The opportunity to play together, to have shared experiences, is just incredibly powerful. I do believe, as an industry, it will continue to have content for a broad diversity of people. Some of the fastest growing areas, geographic areas around gaming are Africa and the Middle East as consumers have more discretionary income, as they have the access to the content.
Mhm.
Uh, I do believe that smaller developers, so these are development teams of less than 50 people, I believe that's where our greatest innovation will come from. And
Okay.
the reason for that is I think it's these smaller teams who are more willing to take risk,
Right.
more willing to try new things. They're more welcoming of new technology.
Right.
And so these are all reasons why I believe these smaller teams will end up doing some of the most interesting and creative content. There are companies like Google that provide services and support for these teams and these developers, which are very, very interesting. So yeah, I see this space as continuing to grow, hopefully continuing to innovate, and it will touch more and more people across the globe.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I wonder too, just thinking back around the innovation factor, you have to have an open mind. And a lot of times when you're in smaller teams and smaller settings, to your point, there's less of an opportunity to go down a rabbit hole because you are a smaller team and you have to be agile and you have to be able to quickly pivot. Um, Speaking of risk and taking risks, especially as an entity, as an individual, or just as a small team or company, you did a lot of these kinds of moves in your career, with companies that you chose, going back to the top of the hour when I mentioned before. You've had accomplishments, failures, awards, all kinds of things have come with this beautiful career that you've had. But would you have made those same moves now knowing what you know, with all of the experience that you now have and all of the wisdom that you're now trying to share with other people? Would you have made those same moves in the same way?
It's a very interesting question. Clearly, there are moves that I've made that have been mistakes, moves that I've made that have not worked out the way I hoped they would have.
Mhm.
But in each case, I learned something. In
Mhm.
each case, I took away from that experience something that I could apply moving forward. And it leads to just a very interesting conversation. There's a lot of talk in popular culture today around regrets and
Mm.
how you think about your regrets.
Yeah.
And I heard an author frame it as, a regret isn't something necessarily that you would go back and change. A regret is an experience where you recognize that at the time you could have done things a little bit differently, and in the moment you could have had a better result, which is just a different way of thinking about regret. But I look back over my life and my career, and the decisions I've made that did not work out well.
Mhm.
I think I would actually relive that same experience, um, and still move forward. Maybe apply myself a little bit differently.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
I do believe that I am enriched by all of the choices I've made. I'm enriched by learning from the mistakes that I've made. And so from that standpoint, I wouldn't want to take away any of those experiences.
Absolutely. And that's a great call out around regret, right? A lot of times the conversation, again, always looking backwards to inform the present time and also the future. But I like that thought process around it's really an opportunity to just review, not necessarily be upset about what happened before because you can't change it, but to dive a little bit deeper into your level of self interrogation so you understand how to move the next time. Reggie, with that, we're going to jump into some questions. And again, appreciate you answering all of the questions that I've had so far. So let me take a look here. We've got some wonderful, wonderful questions. We've got some wild questions here too, but let me start with this one. Benjamin Gao, I hope I'm pronouncing your last name correctly, says, hello, Reggie, you're doing well, and thanks for doing this talk. What advice do you have for someone looking to get into the video game industry? What games are you playing right now?
So in terms of how to get into the video game industry, and I don't have a sense, if you're a creator yourself or you're looking at it from the business perspective. But what I would say is this, given the tools that are available, the best way to get into the video game industry is by making content yourself, making a game, making it available for, others to try, getting that feedback and continuing to iterate on that particular idea that you have in your head. This is an industry that is actually fairly easy to make content within, but iterating on that content and making it better really is where the magic happens. I'll use an example of something that you won't consider as a video game, but it is a game, and that's Wordle, right? That the word puzzle that's taken us all by storm.
Right.
Wordle was created by one individual. He created it for his family because they loved word puzzles and he wanted to create something new. He spent time sharing it with family and friends, iterating on it. And it got to a point where, he was being inundated by requests to have access to this word puzzles. So he ended up putting it on the internet and then eventually sold it to the New York Times Company. Oh, so the core concept here is just make it, just create it in order to get some experience. In terms of what I'm playing, as I said earlier, I play all the latest games, the big games that are in popular culture, and I play a lot of games from independent developers. And in the work that I do, advising companies, work that I've done in acting as a judge for various competitions around independent developer content, I see a lot of games early in their development, and I'm fortunate to then provide some feedback and some perspective on how to make those games better.
Thank you so much for that. Shifting to Joshua Williams' question, where do you see the biggest areas of opportunity for the video game tech organizations to improve their culture and values?
So I do see an ongoing opportunity to bring in, encourage a diverse organization. And I use the word diverse in its totality. It captures all of the experiences and background that make us unique, and leveraging all of those differences in order to move the culture forward and in order to move the business forward. In my book, I highlight a number of examples where, I pushed for driving greater diversity, whether as a first-time hiring manager or whether during my time at Nintendo. And I know that you get better business decisions when you have a diversity of opinion, a diversity of thought, a diversity of life experience in driving a particular business agenda. And so, this is a topic that, yes, gets a lot of focus, but I challenge every business leader that I meet, what they personally are doing to drive more diverse voices and opinions in their organization, because I know it will lead to a better business result.
Absolutely. Just leaning into, activation. A lot of times, people that are sitting in leadership roles inherently so are worried about their personal brand, right? But when it comes to this kind of work, you kind of have to take that portion of who you are, not necessarily put it to the side per se, but it should be maybe secondary to really understanding how to lean into the group of people that you are leading, and honing in on what their needs are, so that they can continue to successfully provide the work that they've been providing for you for that year or for that quarter. Shifting to our next question here, Peter Fararato. Again, Peter, I hope I'm saying your name correctly. Has there ever been backlash to marketing decisions that caught you completely off guard?
So, certainly we have received, in my career, and especially more recently, in this time of social media and the ability for instant reaction and instant feedback. I've been in many situations where the feedback has been different than what was intended.
Mhm.
In that situation, what I advocate is, and it gets back to the discussion we were having earlier about handling objections and selling ideas. I believe that you need to take the feedback on
Mhm.
its face. You need to take the feedback and look at it from the standpoint of, this is what a group of consumers are saying. It's not right or wrong. It is what their perspective is,
Mhm.
and then you need to consider how you adjust, how you shift your messaging, how you shift your approach in order to take that feedback into into consideration. While I was at Nintendo, we launched a system that was called the Wii U.
Mm.
And this system followed the launch of the Wii, where we sold over 100 million units of the Wii. We sold hundreds of millions of video games, a very successful platform. The Wii U was not successful.
Mm.
And while we had all of our best intentions, we put all of our best efforts behind it, but in the end, the consumer appeal wasn't what we hoped it would be. The clarity of the benefit wasn't what we hoped it would be. And instead of having a mentality of, well, the consumer's wrong,
Mhm.
we'll just try harder. Instead, Nintendo dug hard into the feedback. We identified some key elements where the consumer was having a positive experience, and we rolled that insight into the next platform called the Nintendo Switch, which is the
Mm.
platform that they have on the market today. That platform has already outsold the lifetime sales of the Wii, and this platform continues to be very successful in the marketplace. So the key insight is you have to take that type of consumer feedback at its face value, and you have to move forward
Mhm.
and apply the best learning you can into your next initiative.
Absolutely. This will be our last question before we wrap up, Reggie. This question comes from Raisa Dona. What are your thoughts on the evolution of cloud game streaming?
So I believe that game streaming is going to be the common method of delivery, but it's going to be some number of years from now. I use the example of 5 to 8 years from now. Why? Well, the reason for that is that while high-speed internet into consumers' homes is getting much more commonplace, here in the Americas, Europe, parts of Asia. It is not yet happening on a global basis. High-speed internet, for example, much more limited in parts of South America, much more limited when you get outside of the main metropolitan areas in Asia, as an example. So that type of high-speed internet into the home needs to grow demonstrably, and it will over the next number of years. But then the next gating factor is the wireless connection onto your screen device of choice that you're going to play these games. Typically, the high-speed internet isn't necessarily hardwired into all of your screens. And so you need high-speed wireless within the home much faster than the speeds we're getting today. I frame it in terms of 6G or significantly higher wireless within your home, and that's going to be a good 5, 6, 7 years away from now. Once we get there, I do believe the commonplace platform will be a cloud-based system tied to your screen of choice. It will deliver the proverbial Netflix of games where all of the games are available for you to play. I do believe that is where we're headed, but it's not right around the corner.
And these things never are when it's going to be something that turns out to be something big like that. Reggie, I'm going to close out with this last thing for you. So I do this thing, and it's something that I'm thinking about and turning into something much bigger, but it's called Everyday Always. So I'll start with every day I'm hopeful and I'm always ready to live this life. And so I ask you, every day you are what?
So every day I am optimistic.
And you're always ready to what?
And I'm always ready to put my dreams and visions into practice.
I love it. I love it. And with that, Zane, Fadul, I apologize we were not able to get to your question. To all of the folks that were watching today, we appreciate all of the questions. Thank you so much for tuning in. Do not forget to check out Reggie's book, Disrupting the Game, From the Bronx to the Top of Nintendo. And with that, I'm sending all of you nothing but light. I am wishing you nothing but great, great things, a progressive year, and for your hopes and your dreams to continue to live with you. Cheers to all of you, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much.